That's why I said in the next 3 months after, pay attention. Often the events associated with the eclipse happen when another celestial event triggers the eclipse. So, for example, on September 11th, 2001, the planet Mars is a god of war, okay? So if you're studying astrology and you're familiar with that, you understand that. Mars is a god of war. That's the energy. Mars is this ruler. The planet is the ruler of the sign of Aries. So if you know any Aries people, they're usually bombastic. They're first. They know how to be conquistadors. They blaze trails. That's what the god of war does. And that's the energy that was happening on September 11th, 2001. Okay, so the planet Mars and the moon triggered a 2001 solar eclipse on that day. That eclipse had been considered especially powerful because it occurred at the solstice on June 21st, a few months prior to. At that place in the zodiac, astrologers called the world axis, thought to be very important for global events. Eclipses run in cycles, guys. They happen at the same place in the zodiac in predictable manners called the Saros cycle. So looking at the coming eclipse, one of the astrologers, Ed Tamplin, suggested that this eclipse relates to British royalty because the 1981 eclipse cycle happened around the times that Charles and Diana had their first wedding. We're going to take a deeper look at it. A lot of things happen when you're dealing with the Saros cycle, and we can get a little bit into it. That can get a little bit tricky to explain, but assassination attempts have happened, like with Ronald Reagan in 81, around this time, the same time that Diana and Charles were getting married. There was an eclipse cycle happening after John F. Kennedy's assassination. Bill Clinton survived the efforts to impeach him on the same Saros cycle. So perhaps things can be improving for you as presidents. I'm not predicting assassinations. I'm just saying that you either weather a storm in an eclipse or the truth of the situation comes to the forefront and whatever is negative, toxic, or weighing you down falls away. So if Donald Trump's heart is true, and only he'll know that, we'll know the evidence of it by what happens afterwards, the fallout or the exaltation. As a Leo meant to be king, he will either rise to this occasion during this eclipse. And what I mean is, in the next 3 months to a year, you will see that we are watching the turnaround of a person that we maybe have doubted, even on all sides are doubting right now, okay, left and right. And he may really grow and reach great heights politically and tap into his truest self and his highest self and become the president that we are hoping he will become, or it will not work. Like I said, Bill Clinton survived impeachment during one of these eclipses that happened. And even though it sullied his legacy forever, it's something that he survived. So I think that whatever's happening with Donald Trump, we're going to get to watch it unfold now. He's going to become incredibly great and make America great again, like he promised, or nothing is going to work. And it's going to really just fall apart at the seams. There is no choices with eclipse. It goes either way. There is no gray area. He will rise and be amazing, or he won't. And it's very simple to understand when you're looking at the past indicators that have happened. Because eclipses upset the natural order of things. It's so important to understand. It really is going to be important, too, to understand that some technological advances are going to happen when we're dealing with this Saros eclipse cycle. It correlates to innovations that have changed the world from high-speed aircraft to the detonation of atomic bombs, okay? And this solar eclipse happening in a new moon, it's a time when we tend to act instinctively when we're dealing with new moons, okay? Also, thoughts seeded into the new moon are likely to grow into manifestation. Now, any spiritual person will tell you the new moon is a time to plant what you want into the future. The new moon is a time to really dig deep and to create your best life. So like I said, don't be so sure that you know the outcome of what's going on with our politics, because there could be some good things happening if the right energy is planted at this time. So when you're being upset with the natural order and it's interrupting the regularity of the two most important hands on the celestial clock. In earlier times when you're dealing with the sun and the moon, determined on the annual calendar. It was a time of harvest or hunting that was determined, both of which were really essential to survival. The disturbance of the cycle was not surprisingly interpreted, as a heavenly sign of change or displeasure. Any change to the established order was the last thing any power-obsessed person would want. More recently in Australia, kind of folklore became fact, meaning when we see eclipses, we think it takes things away. Well, in Australia, it became fact with eclipses literally eclipsing some of their leaders. So some of the eclipses had happened with Prime Minister Tony Abbott. It happened on 2015, September 4th. And it was Australia's third-serving longest prime minister, Malcolm Fraser, died on an eclipse, and there was great adversaries that usurped authority on eclipse. So there are lots of things that happen on eclipses where it leaves it from being, oh, this is just like bantered about and maybe it might happen, to we can trace back in history for thousands of years how eclipses have affected people. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting was about Christopher Columbus. He did take someone's advice and got an astrologer. And when he came to the Americas, it kind of helped save his life and the life of his crew. Now, we're not going to get into the politics of Christopher Columbus and all that stuff. I want to get into how he harnessed an eclipse to survive. So he was credited with kind of opening the gateway of trade, as you guys know, to the New World. And when he was forced to beach his ships in Jamaica in February 1504, he and his crew were waiting, and they lived off the generosity and the kind of food supply of the indigenous people there. Some of the sailors, though, mutinied and lost, there's always going to be a bad apple in the bunch, and stole from the natives. The natives were not happy. They cut them off from food in retribution. So Christopher Columbus is scared. He's worried about starving. He's worried about his people starving. So he utilizes his intellect, wit, and astrology lesson that he got from his astronomer before he left. So the supplies are exhausted. He has this brainwave, and he calls for a meeting with the tribal chief and announced that the gods were extremely angry at his shabby treatment. And to display his displeasure, that his gods were going to darken the moon. Here's the secret. Columbus, like all mariners, was definitely invested in an astrologer and in understanding the stars because it's how he navigated. So his planetary tables had indicated a forthcoming lunar eclipse visible on the evening of February 29th, 1504. Okay, remember that this is the beginning of February when he begins stranded and his guys act up, steal the food. The natives are pissed. They take it back. No food for them. So this is how it's moving forward. Luckily, that evening was one of the clear skies. And as the moon rose in a darkened blood red, the frightened natives began to panic and cried for Christopher Columbus to restore the light or have his god restore the light. In the hours of the eclipse, they brought offerings of food and gifts to him, and Columbus retired to his cabin to conduct alleged prayers of thanks and forgiveness. But actually, he was timing the eclipse in his cabin via his hourglass. Just before the totality ceased, meaning before the eclipse passed over, he returned to inform the tribe that the lunar god had granted a pardon for their actions and that they were forgiven as long as they continued to give food. They wouldn't darken the skies again. The eclipse for Christopher Columbus on that crafty evening was a lifesaver. It was not because if he had not have done that, he wasn't rescued from Jamaica until about 4 months later. So he bought 4 months of time by knowing astrology. And this is why in my heart, I'm like, Donald Trump, get an astrologer and get your life, because you absolutely could weather this whole presidency and maybe make it another term. But you need guidance of someone that understands when the best time is to say, hey, we're going to do this next move. Astrologers are there for a reason. Kings and queens and royalty and presidents have used them forever. I don't know why. Someone please get this guy an astrologer. It would help things so much. So Christopher Columbus saved his own life by utilizing his knowledge. And so that's one of the things that I think it's incredible, an incredible story. But that's how eclipses can be helpful sometimes too. It didn't spell out danger or the end of the world for him. But it's very important to understand that it is something you need to have a grasp on to know how to utilize it. So I have tons of information here, guys, maybe too much about some of the eclipses because I'm so fascinated by it. But let's see. One of the things that I wanted to share with you here is about the lunar eclipse. Okay, on August 7th, because I said I wanted to talk about both. So it places the moon in an opposing side of Aquarius, and it also lies with the Lord Mars, the god of war. Remember, I told you he's the god of war. And this eclipse has a definite connection with various things that happen. And when you're dealing with the full moon conjoining with Mars, it represents weaponry, okay? Thankfully, in Australia, this is something that happened. It was a rising gold and metal problem, and all has been well since an eclipse happened there for them. So like I said, it can just shift things for the better too. The eclipse also occurs close to famous eclipse of 1999 mentioned earlier. I think I talked to you about that, which may confirm important changes for Russia and Vladimir Putin, or near this date. It matters. And the reason I say that is because he kind of came into power about 16, 17 years ago at a major eclipse. And now that he is trying to forge some new sanctions and things like that with the U.S., that eclipse really matters because it's bringing back energy that got him there into power. It was, as much as people could try to stop things from happening in our world and we think that we have power, our universe is incredible. And I always tell people, if we watch a tide ebb and flow by the pull and gravitational pull of the moon and our planetary rotation, and we are made of mostly water in our bodies, what on earth makes us think that we're not affected by this? My mother works in hospital, and when there are new moons, it never fails. She tells me the best and craziest stories. It's not a coincidence that people say the crazies come out when the full moon's out. That's true. But when you're dealing with eclipses, you're dealing with much more powerful energy than just a full moon. And so a lot of stuff changes. So don't think that this is mumbo jumbo and what's Monette talking about. You will be affected. And that's something that I wanted you to understand. And our country is going to be affected. So the reason we're calling this the Great American Eclipse is because it's the first time it's happened since, I think we're talking about 1918. And that one was really over the oceans, the Atlantic and the south of Alaska, not really on land. The August 21st event will be the first eclipse to make landfall exclusively in the United States since 1776. In that sense, it's an unprecedented event, and it's arriving at an unprecedented time in U.S. history. Everyone paying attention knows that our nation needs some kind of shift. We need some healing. Like I said, Tupac's words at the beginning. Some think that it's just political healing that we need. Others think that it's spiritual. Others think that it's social and economic. There are different notions, guys, regarding what direction these changes need to go. But the one thing that I think that we all agree on is that change is necessary. And in astrology, these eclipses represent watershed events. They can arrive with sweeping changes and represent before and after moments. You understand what I mean by before and after? Like that picture, before you did the redo on your house and after. You can see the difference. And that's what eclipses are, the before and the after. This works personally. And it works collectively, and it is especially true for the place where the individuals and the collective intersect. Eclipses represent collective events which have deep personal influence. They represent change. And with the shadow falling across the United States, change is imminent. We're watching it happen. On my way to the studio today, I think something new was just passed. It was on Reuters and NPR that transgenders will not be allowed to serve in the military. The change is happening all the time. I don't care what you feel about that. It's a change, and it happened. It just happened, and they're going to be happening that quickly over the next few months, so pay attention. And they will affect us. This is not some nebulous thing that's going to affect the world. America, this is for us. This is the first time since 1776 that it's touched landfall for us, and we're going to be able to watch it, and we won't see another one in our lifetime of this magnitude. Pay attention. So for people that are like, well, how did we get here? And what's going on? And why are these our leaders? For such a time as this, I have such great peace that I didn't have in the beginning of this. In order for change to happen, I've talked about this, we need contrast. This whole situation is the epitome of contrast. Now you decide how you make it better. And our leaders still have a decision here. They're still in power, and they get to decide how to make things better. Even if we don't agree with what their idea of better is. They do have an idea, and there has to be a respect given to understand what that may be. Even if you're like doom and gloom, or you're like, this is the best thing that